and I decided to go on YouTube as well, make some content that basically just dispels a bunch of mainstream nutrition myths, but in a way that is a lot more confrontational because I respond to people directly in their videos. I make a lot of critique videos, as I call them. I've changed my approach a little bit. I've made some other types of videos as well. They're shorter, a little more blunt, you could say, but they still cover the same things, just basically reviewing papers that are just absolute nonsense.
Yes.
And really the word that comes to mind is vapid. They're really just like, there's nothing there. They're very weightless. So that's what I do. There's a lot of criticism on my channel.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it deserves to be pulled up and pointed out to people because it's frustrating. And we've also got the world's top nutritionist just entered the room. Richard. Hello, Richard.
Good evening, gents. Apologies. I was just on a call with our good friend Anthony. So he was literally jumping off that one onto this one. So apologies on late. But Eddie, great to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah.
Good. Eddie and I recorded a fantastic podcast, the first of many. I think I'm going to structure in such a way where Eddie's knowledge can be delivered in depth each time, because I think sometimes our longer podcasts can, even with things that I'm into, if it's a podcast that's too technical, it can sort of start to drain, can it? So it's we recorded a 45-minute podcast, which I'm hoping to release tomorrow. And then Eddie, when you're available, we'll get you back on for round 2. But looking forward.
Yeah, sounds good. And then you can get in touch with me about round 3 and then 4. You know, again, like you said, we talk a lot about a lot of different things. So yeah.
And there's lots to talk about. Lots to talk about.
Well, we've got lots of questions, and don't forget, Richard, it's 5 minutes maximum per question, and we're going to stick to one question. Yes, Eddie, yes.
I do Eddie type answers. Eddie's worse than I am. Eddie's
yes,
worse
yes,
than I am.
It's true. Actually, I catch myself off guard every time. I'll start talking about something else, and then I'll be like, "Where was I? Actually, what was the question?"
Yeah. Well, at the moment, we're light on questions, so maybe we go longer. But what tends to happen, Eddie, is once we're like 20 minutes in, we end up with so many questions. But let's start and let's see how we go. So, Moorhen, could insomnia prevent my carnivore diet from healing me? Poor sleep for over 30 years. That's possibly more of an issue. Probably stress related. Been on carnivore for over a year. Please speak on sleep and carnivore. I mean, I tend to put my little 2 pence in. You're bang on the nail there that sleep is the critical restorative process. You know, that's when you repair. So it's a great question. So I'll open that up. As Eddie's the guest, Eddie, do you fancy a crack at that first?
Yeah, that's an interesting question there. If you've been having poor sleep for 30 years, this is obviously a pre-carnivore diet issue. I would be inclined to ask how carnivore may have changed it, even if it may be suboptimal still. And that may point us in a direction of, okay, well, if something helped, if it did help, if it seems to, you have an association between better sleep, even if it's still suboptimal with a carnivore diet, then, it could, again, point us in a direction, it could maybe be a good start. That's something that I haven't really experienced personally. There's a lot of factors at play when it comes to poor sleep. I mean, is it because you're not getting enough fat in? Is it because you're not getting enough protein in? I mean, any nutrient in mind could be, an issue. But I feel like I would need more information on that. I mean, I know that, and that's not their fault because, again, it's a short little. You can only put so much in a chat like that. But
yeah,
I don't know what else I'd also be inclined to see what else they've tried. Again, that's where I'm led to, is what else have you introduced something into your diet? Like I know a lot of people might want to be taking a magnesium supplement. Some people decide to do that for sleep. And if that helps, then that might point us in the direction of how you can change the diet in a way that could help you sleep better, if the diet is the problem in the first place. Again, health history is important too. So.
Yeah, 100%. Completely agree. I think both of you have nailed that. I think the magnesium is an important point. Glycinate tends to work best for sleep issues in the evening, so it could be an electrolyte imbalance. The carnivore lifestyle or ketogenic even helped me. I used to suffer with insomnia. The answer for me was eating slightly later, believe it or not. So I like to eat not too long before bed, believe it or not. So the opposite to what the general way of thinking is for me. If I don't eat sort of 2 hours before bedtime, then I generally don't sleep. So as we gravitate into carnivore, you could be suffering from hypoglycemia also. So a little bit of protein, a nice bolus of protein just before bed could help alleviate that. But as Eddie's alluded to, it could be an electrolyte imbalance. And obviously pre-existing. I mean, if it's been there for 30 years, there's something else going on. What I have noticed with carnivore is that I do need less sleep, like far less sleep. And biphasic sleep is something that carnivore has introduced me to. You know, all the way through history, we've seen biphasic sleep where in the literature, people would wake up and start writing part of their scriptures or whatever, and then go back to sleep. And I found that helps for me. If I wake, I don't pick up my phone. I don't go onto the PC because of the blue light, but I'll read a page of a book and then I'm straight back to sleep. But it doesn't affect my energy. I get a lot less sleep. And the biphasic sleep seems to be something that is becoming quite normal recently. But carnivore certainly helped for me. Certainly helped.
That's actually a good point. I had someone was interviewing me like a little less than a year ago, and they actually asked me about sleep because they had said that some people, they talk about how on carnivore they may wake up more often. And they said, well, they were asking me like, could carbohydrates be used as a tool to help with staying asleep longer without waking up in the middle of the night? And I said, well, I might have a contentious response to this, but if you're getting adequate sleep when after the final time you wake up, you're not tired, and you also are able to go to sleep easily at the beginning of your sleep session, let's say, then is it appropriate to say that if you have maybe 1 or 2 times during the night that you wake up, that's poor sleep? It may not be. It may be something that's just naturally supposed to be happening, and like we need to look at the actual quality of the sleep itself. Like, when you wake up, are you exhausted? Like, do you feel like you didn't really get REM sleep at all, like, or didn't sleep at all in general, or do you feel completely fine despite the fact that you may have woken up once or twice? I can tell you right now, like, I wake up about 2 times in the middle of the night, but I go right back to sleep, and that never used to happen. But I've also noticed that if I this happened more in the past, but if I had carbohydrates at all, always less than 50 grams, but if I had them, I would tend to sleep more through the night without any bouts of waking up. But when I woke up, I felt more tired. So again, it just begs the question as to whether less frequent bouts of waking up for a few seconds in the night necessarily means better sleep. But I'm not trying to discount the person here by saying they've had poor sleep for 30 years. It's just a question, just again, with the more details are needed.
Yeah, I think this is the problem, because if you don't know about biphasic sleep, for instance, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning every night or once or twice a week, you think there's a problem. But if you go back to sleep, say after half an hour, and you wake up and you're refreshed, there isn't a problem. But you've been led to believe that's a problem. So I think in the end, it's a bit like when people say, I've gone carnivore and I've got constipation. Well, have you got constipation, or are you just going less? So I think it's actually understanding the whole thing. But hopefully more hen, that has helped you a little bit. Right, we'll go to the next question. And now the questions are flooding in. So Solar Dare, I think there's 3, it looks like 3 questions, but it's all one. So I'll read it all out and then we'll go into this. So any tips can help along a carnivore journey, as I'm pretty sure I'm doing something wrong. 145 days in and feeling very fatigued, severe OCD, intrusive thoughts are getting worse. Daily functioning is being severely hindered, and I was really, really hoping this way of eating would help, but I'm feeling hopeless and frustrated that it's not working. Also developed a histamine intolerance due to having the majority of meals being ground beef, as I'm on a fixed income due to health reasons. Should I start with carnivore, swap to ketovore, or keto, or even low histamine diet?
Yeah, let Eddie go first, shall we?
Okay, yeah, that's quite dense. There's a lot there. 145 days. I mean, again, when it comes to fatigue, there's a few things that come to mind. One of the most common problems that I always see in the carnivore space in terms of the people saying they're having problems is always, once again, as trite as it is electrolyte imbalances. However, a lot of people may believe that if you have an electrolyte imbalance, the fix is to up your electrolytes, which may not be the problem, the root problem. It may actually be an insulin thing. If you have too low of insulin regularly, you're basically in a steady state of ketosis without bumping out, bumping your insulin enough, which may cause an inability to retain electrolytes, which may cause fatigue. There's other problems that are usually the more salient ones when that happens, though, but that could be something. The other thing that my brain goes to is if it's not insufficient protein because of insulin, it could be insufficient fat. I mean, the thing is your body primarily on a ketogenic diet is depending on fat for fuel, for oxidative, for ATP production. So if you're someone that is over consuming protein, even if you don't realize it, I mean, it's really easy to do it if you get leaner meat. And depending on where you are, that may be the cheaper option is leaner meat. Sometimes it's fattier meat, but sometimes it's leaner meat is actually the cheaper option. And so if you're struggling with money, that may be something that you maybe aren't paying as much attention to, because you may not think it's that much of a problem, is the protein to fat ratio. Those are the two main things that come to mind. I don't know if Richard has anything else to say about that.
Yeah, completely agree. I think minced or ground beef is incredibly cheap, and it's a fantastic source of nutrients should you be able to cope with any side effects. I do find that ground beef, or mince as we call it in the UK, does tend to be higher in histamine, and I think it's to do with the fact that most of the meat is used for the mince because it's slightly older and it's going through this mincing process, so that could be problematic. I think 100% it could be not enough fat. It could be the body's inability to utilize the animal proteins and fats, and it does take time to upregulate. When we gravitate into the lifestyle, if we've lived a lifestyle for so long that doesn't contain animal fats, we lose our ability to absorb the nutrients. So there's the bile production problem in the first place. And then when we do upregulate the bile, it's meant to be reabsorbed. So the bile will act upon the foods, the proteins and the fats, and it'll increase the surface area for the pancreatic enzymes to go to action. If it's unable to do so, then we don't utilize those nutrients efficiently. And then the bile can be, the bile is usually or meant to be reabsorbed in the small intestine, and this can pass through in the stool. So you may be suffering with watery stools in this case. Or even constipation if it's still earlier in that phase. So it could be a malabsorption problem. The easy way to test this is to add taurine and zinc just before your meal. This will increase the acidity in the gut and see if you can absorb those nutrients a little bit better. But certainly if you're still suffering with fatigue, it definitely lends itself to a beta oxidation problem, because even if you're not creating ketones, which you should be, at this point you should be efficient enough to burn the fat for energy. So there's definitely problems going on there. I would assume digestion problems or reabsorption issues, and as Eddie says, electrolyte problems. And as you guys know, I make electrolytes for this reason. I do think we can obtain all the electrolytes we need from diet, but I do also believe very few of us are coming from such a damaged state that it takes time in order to gravitate towards these adaptation processes. And I think, from an evolutionary perspective, we would have caught and killed an animal. We would have consumed the whole animal, which would have included leaner cuts of meat, fattier cuts of meat. They would have included organ meats, which contain electrolytes and some form of glycogen. We would have drunk the blood. We would have consumed the knuckles on the end of the bone and the connective tissue, which is highly nutrient dense, full of collagens and the electrolytes. And these are things that we don't do today. So I think it does lend itself to potentially try in maybe the supplementation of a good quality electrolyte. Again, I won't get into the detail in regards to what to look for there, because we'll be talking about this for another 2 hours. and I'm on the clock. Can
I just add a little bit as well?
Yeah.
You can ask for on-demand ground beef. So if it's pre-packed, you could actually say, look, I've got a histamine intolerance. Can you actually give me some freshly ground beef? So we've had the two sciencey sort of answers. I'm just going to do a little practical one. So that's the first thing you try to do. Don't go to the supermarket where it may be ground and in there for 2 days or 3 days or whatever. I know it's refrigerated, but you could say I need it on demand, and I'm sure most places would do that. To be absolutely frank with you, Then also when you get home, if you're going to eat it that day, that's fine. But if you've got more than enough and you've got like 3 or 4 days supply, freeze the rest
Freezing.
and cook it fresh from thawing out every single time. So,
Mhm.
I would actually freeze it in batches of how much you're going to cook, get that batch out for the next day, when you're going to eat it, thaw it out and cook it from freshly thawed out. So, right.
Alex, just one other thing. I've just noticed something else that they mentioned in there. Sorry, Steve. I will be quick with this, but gravitated potentially back to just one more question. They do mention there about potentially going back to keto. Look, I'm a big believer in gravitating slowly towards carnivore through incremental changes. This is something Stephen and I talk about a lot. I was on with Bart Kay recently, and this is something we spoke about. The gut microbiome, the Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes go through a change, and it takes time for the body to adapt. So, we need to upregulate those enzymes within the body to be able to process and utilize the proteins and fats. So I do think an incremental approach can be more beneficial. So it may even be a case for you to take a step back and potentially incorporate some of those nasty plant compounds. But look, there's lots of options there. Keto worked for me for 5 to 6 years, in my journey. And I'm still ketogenic because carnivore is, essentially a subsection of a ketogenic lifestyle. But there are lots of levers to pull there, and maybe some recommended suggestions to implement.
Brilliant. And yes, and some people have histamine intolerance, but it's actually oxalate problems. Anyway, Leslie Little, thank you very much for a super chat. If you want to get your question answered and jump the queue, then a super chat always helps. It helps the channel. It helps people in the room, because, it's the begging bowl time, and, it does really help. And let's get to the next question. But Leslie, thank you very much. You've actually just given a super chat and haven't even asked a question. So that's really appreciated. So good. Right. Alex is the next one. I hear from multiple studies. Eddie and I were talking about studies before we came on. But anyway, I hear from multiple studies asserting that plant antioxidants such as quercetin only kill cancer cells and protect normal cells. To what extent is this correct?
Okay, we'd have to look at the mechanism that they're referencing. That they're saying is the mechanism by which these antioxidants, quote unquote, from the plants are killing cancerous cells, because that will allow us to distinguish between whether it's probably killing only cancer cells and then leaving normal cells behind. Cancer cells, really, the main difference between cancerous cells and normal cells is their mitochondrial function. So they have a failed mitochondria. The mitochondria in cancer cells are still alive, but they're still respiring, but they're not actually producing the ATP for the cell. And then they metastasize and they grow and all that stuff. But I can't really see a mechanism by which a distinction between a cancerous cell and a normal cell that a compound from plants would specifically target that it wouldn't be able to target in normal cells because it's not there. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. What we see usually in these studies is that these people will consume plant antioxidants, and they'll call them antioxidants because what they see is that it's associated with an increase in glutathione production, in intracellular antioxidants. But they don't realize that points in the exact opposite direction, meaning that it points to the direction of it being an oxidant, a pro-oxidant, not an antioxidant, because if it were acting as a pro-oxidant, if anything, it would decrease the demand that the body would perceive as being a demand for glutathione upregulation and creation. But yes, as a more simple answer, to go back to what I said, we'd have to see the mechanism. They can't just say, well, it just conveniently say it. It doesn't affect normal cells. In fact, when we're talking about sulforaphane, which is one of these, the evidence suggests that it attacks all of them because it kills cells via oxidation. It deranges the cells. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that.
Completely agree. It's the question for me there would be, do you have cancer? Because if you don't have cancer, would you take a chemotherapy pill? And again, as Eddie said, sulforaphane is created during the chewing process when we bite into broccoli. So it's a defense chemical. It's an isothiocyanate. It's created when glucoraphanin binds to myrosinase, and it creates this defense chemical, which again, as Eddie says, yes, fantastic. It helps kill cancer cells. But one, do you have cancer? And two, we know the sulforaphane damages other cells. So that's what I take it back to. Quercetin is an endocrine disruptor. It's a type of flavonoid that affects many processes within the body. Quercetin, known for being found in onions, for example, but it affects many, many different things within the body. It's a type of flavonoid that causes things like infertility, poor sperm count. It's an endocrine disruptor, and it does this by activating the 17B estradiol receptor, blocking thyroid peroxidase, which we need to make thyroid hormones, which causes thyroid problems. It can lead to increase in inflammatory markers, interleukin-1, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and many other problems within the body. And so flavonoids, we find them in nature under many different things. Genistein, quercetin, anthocyanin in berries, for example. All of these things, when we look at studies and research papers, it shows that they confer benefits. And again, as Eddie just said, it's through the activation of glutathione, which is a pro-oxidant activation via the NRF2 pathway, which if we take in the short term, activation of NRF2 can be beneficial in the short term. This is why these studies seem to be beneficial, because they're done in groups of sick people. So if you give somebody, a sick person, an increase in glutathione, it can lead to a benefit. But what we tend to find is that this benefit is short-lived, and we require more of said compound, which is a medication. This is what plants are, by the way. And then we consume more and more and more for the same effect, because it becomes less and less effective. And then we activate, overexpress the NRF2 pathway. It leads to the activation of nuclear factor kappa B, which is an incredibly damaging pathway within the body. And we know that other things that activate NRF2 are things like exhaust fumes, mercury, arsenic, lead, tobacco smoke. And we can elicit the same response via NRF2 and the activation of glutathione through these things, lead, mercury, arsenic, tobacco smoke, as we do from vegetables. So just ask yourself, if you were sick or if you suffered with cancer, for example, would you do those other things? Because it's the same pathway. But take it back to the original question, do you have cancer? If I had cancer, which I don't think I will ever get, and that's a strong statement to make, but I don't consume any of the fuel that would fuel a cancer cell, which is primarily glucose. Glutamine further downstream, but cancer cells are fueled by glucose through a fermentation process. They lose their ability for oxidative phosphorylation, and it pushes glucose into a fermentation process, and it's the lactic acid or the lactate that fuels the cancer cell. But if we do not consume glucose or fructose, then we quite literally remove the fuel for the cancer cell. So I wouldn't even be consuming broccoli or any other said compound for that matter if I found out I had cancer, which I don't think that I ever would, because I'm lacking the stimulus, and if we look at what causes cancer, it's I believe it to be a metabolic disease. A fantastic podcast with Thomas Seafood I recorded, and Stephen, I think, has had him on, possibly. I don't know if you've had him on your show, Eddie, but a fantastic person to get on. Super informative, and he describes the mechanisms, and he basically believes that it originates through damage to the mitochondria, which I believe comes from sugar in the first place. So not only does sugar fuel the cancer, but I believe it's one of the main causes of damage to the mitochondria.
Well, we know that glucose itself will cause mitochondrial DNA damage. I mean, but via its mechanisms, and that's the problem. The common denominator with all cancer cells is a dysfunction of mitochondrial DNA, and so you can basically say that it's hard to say like anything that may cause damage to the mitochondrial DNA would be necessarily be a carcinogen. I mean, we know that UV light eventually, if you're exposed to it long enough, can also do that, but you wouldn't call sun a carcinogen. It's all a multifaceted issue, but we do know that the sun is more important, at least arguably, to get than exogenous glucose. So, then, I would be more inclined to call glucose a potential carcinogen than sunlight, is what I'm saying. But, that's when it comes, yeah, if I could add I know that you said, Stephen, it was a 5-minute maximum response, and we really try. We try to treat it like a rule, not a guideline. I'm sure, but or a recommendation. But if you can activate the NRF2 pathway via all these damaging effects, that should be your first inference. I mean, these absolutely damaging things that we know to be damaging, like smoking, will upregulate NRF2. Then you know that not necessarily an activation of it is a good thing. But if you do think it's a good thing, you do think that you can employ something that will activate it in an acute way that has a net benefit as opposed to a net loss, then why wouldn't you choose something like, I mean, even exercise can upregulate NRF2. Why wouldn't you choose to do something like that? You don't have to, and not to mention that, once again, like Richard said, it doesn't mean to be taking it every single day, especially when you don't have an issue that would require you to upregulate said pathway in the first place.
Yeah.
So,
or we can remove NRF2 and just activate glutathione via ketone production.
Yes. Well, and it does raise the question, if you're activating this NRF2 pathway and then subsequently raising glutathione in response to oxidative damage from the compound that you've consumed, are you actually deriving a benefit, or is the benefit just canceling out the negative? Which would mean it's not a benefit at all. It's a net zero, if anything, or it could still be a net, negative.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, the guidelines. So we're going to go back to next question. Brilliant. Leslie, we found your super chat question. You've put a typo there. I no longer have my thyroid. Keto for 2 years, carnivore for the past 12 months. Can one improve metabolism in this scenario? No weight loss. So I'm struggling. So I'm assuming you want weight loss. Yes, you definitely can improve your body composition, your overall health, even if you don't have a thyroid. I mean, I do deal with people that have had their thyroid irradiated, removed due to cancer. And yeah, it takes some management. It does take some management. It's tougher, but it's a hell of a lot easier with this way of eating, or low carb or keto, than on the standard American diet or vegetarian or vegan, because you are doing all the right things to give your body the right environment. But I will hand over to the guys, because I don't want to eat into the 5 minutes.
Well, this is something that I don't know. I think that Richard should take over, because this is something I'm very unfamiliar with. Unfamiliar with. So in order to be responsible, I'm not going to give a complete, yeah.
So yes, as Stephen says, is the short answer. Look, there are many people who suffer with hyperthyroid, which is incredibly damaging, and then they take radioactive medication to damage the thyroid because it's far less problematic. That's not ideal either. Obviously, these are things that we want in the body. Thyroid can help regulate metabolism and many other things within the body, but it's certainly not essential. The body is an incredibly intuitive machine. And when we remove one thing, other systems and pathways are upregulated. So I believe that purely through living a ketogenic carnivore-based lifestyle, blocking all of the other things that cause things like insulin resistance, not that insulin resistance is a real thing. But so Eddie, insulin resistance, we all agree isn't a real thing, but we use it as terminology because this is what people understand. But go on, you were going to jump in.
Well, yeah. So I wouldn't say that insulin resistance isn't a real thing. I think it's misrepresented. Like when people say insulin resistance, I think the problem is believing that insulin resistance is the pathology, because it's not the pathology. Insulin resistance is a phenomenon that occurs. This is why if anyone listens to Bart, he'll call it a concept or a construct. But a lot of times people don't know what that means. What he means is that, first of all, you can't measure it directly. It's a phenomenon that's basically, it's a proxy measure. You look at how well your body is responding to a glucose bolus via its insulin level. And if there's a commensurate level of insulin to glucose, and very quickly after that insulin rises and the glucose goes down, then you're said to be insulin sensitive, even though there's not a direct measurement of insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance. I think there's many causes of insulin resistance. People may have heard of the Randle cycle, the cross inhibition of fatty acids and glucose that happens in fat cells and muscle cells, basically any cell actually that has those two pathways, but primarily muscles and fat cells that can seem to cause it. You've also got a maximum hypertrophy of fat cells themselves to the point where they can't expand anymore. And so no matter how much insulin is there to try and push glucose in, it doesn't go in because, or else the cell would, die, and then you have fat leaking out, which actually fat still does come out to some extent. And there's probably another. I mean, there's many different causes. I think anything that inflammation itself, if you damage a cell enough, it's not going to want to take in anything. It's sort of like when you're sick and you don't want to eat. It's like, okay, I don't want anything. I'm not hungry. I'm not. But I think the misrepresentation is a big problem. When people say insulin resistance, typically the people that say insulin resistance are referring to it as the pathology. You need to treat the insulin resistance by, I don't know, forcing glucose into cells, like metformin. A lot of people don't actually know how metformin works. I've had concerns about it because that's sort of the very superficial, simplified version. But then you go even deeper and you realize, oh, that could be a big issue. The reason it works is because it shuts down complex 1 of your electron transport chain. And so what it will do is it'll cause the cell to be like, oh, okay, we need more energy then, because you've basically stopped one of the biggest sources of the energy creation pathway, ATP. And so it'll say, okay, so we need to pull more substrate from the blood. So basically it forces glucose in, not by pushing, but by pulling. So it'll pull glucose in. The problem though, is that you produce a lot of this, of pyruvate, and then pyruvate produces a lot of NADH. NADH goes through complex 1, but you've inhibited complex 1. And so I had a theory that maybe metformin could be associated with a bunch with lactic acidosis if you took enough of it. Now, not to say that a normal dose would cause it, but I looked into it, and there's been instances of lactic acidosis occurring because pyruvate can't get into the mitochondria because you've blocked the area that most of the derivatives of pyruvate go to create energy. It's a theory. I mean, I don't know if that's the exact reason for it, but it's just one of these things that if you treat insulin resistance as the pathology, which most people that refer to insulin resistance as insulin resistance are doing, that's going to be the problem. The body's doing exactly what it should be doing given the circumstances. So
100%. Yeah, completely agree. It's metformin translocates the GLUT4 transporter to the surface via AMPK, doesn't it? So it forces the cell to accept more glucose when it doesn't want to. So it's not an insulin problem; it's a glucose problem. But just coming back to that question, because I don't feel that we've given that question enough to take away in regards to helping with weight loss. Look, there are a number of things. I think what was it? 2 years carnivore and still struggling. So like the activation and increase of insulin, it can be problematic when it comes to storing fat, because this will break the bonds on the glycerol backbone and send fatty acids into the fat cell. So we're going to keep insulin low, which is what you're doing on carnivore. A big mistake I find that people make, especially women, is that they don't eat enough. So they tend to eat 1 meal a day, which I believe works better for men. I think men do better on 1 to 2, and I think women do better on 2 to 3. So meal timings is really important. So if you're not already, Leslie, I'd maybe begin eating 2 to 3 meals a day. Eating fat typically is nature intended. So everything in nature comes with fat at almost equal ratios. So eat your chicken breast with the skin on, for example. Eating your beef as it comes, and so on and so forth. So meal timings would be the first thing that I'd make sure that we're doing there. So we're at least producing and creating all of the other hormones and giving the body the best chance to heal and repair. Once we're in a healed and repaired state, if you are consuming 2 or 3 meals a day, and you're already there, then maybe you're consuming too much fat. And the reason I say this is that fat is super important, and everyone within this community will tell you how important fat is, and we prioritize fat over everything. But I think we can push this too far. And if we look as nature intended, as I mentioned earlier, the animal contains fatty cuts of meat, and it also contains lean cuts. And we typically don't do this on carnivore anymore. We just go for the fat ribeye or the chuck steak or the mince with all the fat in, and that's brilliant. But when are we consuming the leaner cuts, which we would have done? We would have done that, because we wouldn't have wasted the animal. So the lever to pull in that case would be to eat 1 or 2 leaner meals or days throughout the week. So have your fatty day as normal, and then maybe the next day gravitate to a couple of days of leaner cuts. And if that is the problem, this will upregulate the body's ability to utilize the stored body fat over the consumption of the exogenous fat. So it depends on where you are, but depending on where you are there, I think there's 2 little things that you can take away there and try to implement. You're muted, Steve. He does this a lot, Eddie.
Well, I don't like the feedback, you know. So anyway, right. Yes. That was a great answer. Now, if you think that's a good answer, but you want more of this, and you want more time, you can join our school group. Just quickly showing you what it looks like. I will put a link in the chat in a second. This is where we have a community. It's very vibrant. You can ask lots of questions. We also do lives. We're going to do a live half hour straight after this at 8 p.m. And we also do one on a Monday for an hour. So if you feel like these questions are getting answered, but you know, I want even more, that's great. We also have a load of courses that you can work your way through. All of them have pretty much free ebooks, videos as well. We also have the calendar there, by the way. This is where you see what we're doing. Look down here, Eddie is the guest. And that's the school group. You can ask us questions as well. So if you feel like you want a more personal service, then you can definitely do that. Right. Okay. And if you want to join it, there is a link now in the chat. We've got 2 super chats. As I say, super chats get you a full frank answer, and also you push ahead of the queue. This is a nice simple one though, but thank you for the $20. What are your thoughts on biltong, which is fattier and salted, seasoned, dried at room temperature versus jerky? Can this be a large part of healthy carnivore diet? How large a part? That's really good. Of course, in Afrikaans, biltong means buttock strip, if in case you wanted to know. But anyway, right, guys, what do you think?
I think that, you know, once again, like Richard is saying, in nature, we would have taken advantage of all parts of the animal, at least to some extent. Usually a rule that I follow is if you look at the proportion that the meat that you're referring to takes up on a cow, that should probably be how much of a proportion you're eating in your daily life on a carnivore diet. I think that jerky itself, that's a little more, well, that's a lot more, what's a word to use? It's artificial, but it's a more new thing, right? Because historically we weren't drying the meat in a dehydrator or something. It doesn't mean that it can't be part of that, but usually I tell people to be careful not to depend on beef jerky as a primary source of nutrition, because if you're draining the water out, your water soluble vitamins, your B vitamins and vitamin C, could be an issue. But again, if it's one factor of the whole diet, then you're getting B vitamins and vitamin C from the other parts of the meat, the other cuts of meat. So I think that really I don't feeling positive or negative about really any part of the cow, as long as it's in the proportion that I think is most appropriate, according to the proportion in which you would find it on the cow, on the full animal, if that makes sense. I don't know if you agree with that, Richard.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think these things are fantastic. It's, you know, I think we should always predominate real animal proteins first and foremost, but there are always other levers, and these are real animal proteins, but in their preparation, in regards to some of the things that are added, you know, spices and other things, salted is fine. I can't consume black pepper. Something that I've only discovered within recent years. Now, black pepper blocks phase 2 detoxification in the liver. It causes lots of issues with me. It brings me out in cold sores. So I can't consume them. So things like biltong and jerky sometimes can't work for me if they've added spices or any other form of black pepper and so on. But if they work for you, I think they are a fantastic tool, especially on the go. I mean, meats like this. What I do when I'm traveling, I usually do a service station stop, or I'll prep before I go, and I'll take lots of sliced meats. It is difficult to find quality sliced meats these days in the service station that don't contain dextrose or some form of sugar or some other crap, but they are out there. So, I mean, look, these things I think can be a part of a carnivore lifestyle, but I wouldn't actively make sure that they replace meals on a constant basis. But I've used them. You know, I've used biltong, jerky, pemmican, which is another thing that we stock by the Pemmican Project. I mean, that's fantastic. It's just beef and salt. It's perfect, you know. But I love eating steak. I love eating and lamb, steak and lamb. So for me, you know, to be without them, but I think there are far worse things to be consuming, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And just to reflect the comments, yes, we know that people have been drying meat for a long time. I think we were answering the question because there's a lot of product out there and that's the thing. There's a lot of jerky that is processed and does have lots of stuff added to it. If you can get a very clean jerky, you can get very clean biltong. That's great. Honestly, both are good, convenient snacks. Absolutely great. The issue is, but people are in business to make money. You know, it's popular. Pemmican's popular. Carnivore bars are popular. Because carnivore is popular, there are people trying to make snacks out there. So I think if you can find one that's clean, basically, you're going to be okay. Just going back to the chats and the super chats, we've got another one here, which is a nice general thing to say. Brona, did you read the latest paper, Myths and Facts regarding the low carbohydrate diets? Great for us practitioners to teach and educate our patients. Nurse practitioner in neurology. Keep up the good work. I haven't actually read it. I'm going to be really honest. I could pretend I have. I have not read it, but I've heard of it. I don't think the thing is when it's sort of pro what we're doing. Well, I don't want to be an echo chamber, to be absolutely frank. I'd rather read something that apparently has been said that doesn't sit well with me and look at the study and see. So, for instance, recently it was the butter, dump the butter for seed oils. Well, that study takes a lot of reading, and we broke that down and realised it was all statistical, theoretical modelling and rubbish, basically, with terrible comparator groups and everything.
Was that the one with 3 different cohorts? It was an epidemiological meta-analysis or something. It was posted in the beginning of March, I think. I don't know what the title of the study was, but I also did a review of that as much as possible because I couldn't actually access the full text for some reason.
Yes,
usually I can.
It was a paywall when I went behind it. You wouldn't believe that. Well, you might believe it was the Fruit and Nut Commission, the California Walnut Commission. Just loads of vested interests, conflicts of interest. But anyways, going back to the paper in question, I haven't read it. Richard?
I haven't, to be honest. I wish I had more of an answer for you. But I haven't. Yeah, apologies.
But to go to what you're saying in the question, yes, it is a brilliant thing that these things are available for nurse practitioners, because if you've got a nice, well-worded, well-researched, well-referenced study, the thing is, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't have not seen the study. It could be epidemiological. What does Bart say? He calls it I can't even do it now, but he calls it a funny name. But anyway, epidemiology. So is it relative risk? I don't know, you see. I haven't seen the study, but if it helps you, that's great. Right. Kayla, 199, thank you very much indeed. 36-year-old, risks for developing Alzheimer's, including genetics, maternal and paternal, heavy drinking, carbs at a young age, brain trauma, childhood, epilepsy, carnivore, 1.5 years now. Is it damage done? Well, there will be some damage, yes, but the human body is remarkable at repairing. So if you look at the liver, you can damage the liver. You can take 70% of the liver away and it will regenerate. So I'm going to hand over to the guys because I'm supposed to be moderating. But anyway, yes.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to say that about the genetics thing. A lot of people think that if they have a genetic predisposition to something, then their risk is necessarily higher. And I don't exactly believe that because genes, a lot of times they have to be activated. And if you don't activate them by doing either improper behavior or actively not doing good behavior, a lot of times that can be, a factor, then your risk really remains 0, doesn't it? Even if you have that genetic predisposition when activated. That's what it really matters. That's what really matters, because there's this thing in biology that there's genotype and then there's phenotype, and phenotype is often referred to as the epigenetics. I know, Richard, you've talked about epigenetics before. So basically you can have permanent changes to your genome. So you have a set of genes and they can be activated or deactivated. The activation or deactivation of them is the phenotypical expression of those genes. So how the genes are expressed is your phenotype, really. And so once again, it goes back to that, is your risk necessarily higher if you have the genes? No, not necessarily. It could be 0 as long as the gene is either not activated, or if it's activated, if it's something that is designed to curtail the development of an illness or something like that, like Alzheimer's, for example.
Yeah, 100%. I think when we look at genetics, and as Eddie just mentioned there, we can control our epigenetics by as much as 70%. And it's to do with HDACs and HATs and many other things, but I won't get into that today. But what I will come into in regards to the genetic side, ApoE4 is a big worry for lots of people living this lifestyle. But ApoE4 is the oldest variant. It changed around 200,000 years ago to ApoE3 and then ApoE2. And studies have shown that if you have this, then you are at increased risk of Alzheimer's, dementia, and so on and so forth. But I don't believe this to be true. ApoE is the ferry, if you like, that transports the cholesterol, and it's regardless of which type. ApoE4 does this a little slower, but only in states of insulin resistance within the brain. Coming back to that basic terminology, if you were not over consuming lots of carbohydrates and vegetable oils, which do lead to insulin resistance, by the way, then we can speed up this transportation process, which basically means that whether you have ApoE4 or not, it doesn't matter. Within the studies that show that it increases risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, dementia, these people are also consuming lots of sugar, seed oils, and other compounds that lead to what we refer to as insulin resistance in the brain. In a carnivore state and a ketogenic state, it doesn't seem to be problematic. So yes, damage, has been caused. I'm a true believer in the body wanting to heal and repair. Your body doesn't want to be sick. It wants to heal and repair. And I believe that, millions and millions of years of evolution allows us to be able to do this, providing we put our bodies into the correct state and environment. And this is controlled predominantly by diet and lifestyle. If you're living a ketogenic, carnivore-based lifestyle, this is the best course of action. It's allowed me to achieve incredible things. I could barely walk a flight of stairs in my mid to late 20s. And now, 41, I'm the healthiest and fittest that I've ever been, medication-free. And look, this is still working for me. I know, slightly off topic, but what we put in is what we get out.
Yeah,
if we put crap in, then we get crap out.
Yes. By the way, for people that are enjoying Eddie's answers, he has a fantastic book called Contraindicated. We don't tend to do plugs on this program, but I really want to do that because it is a fantastic book, and version 2 is going to be out, or edition 2 is going to be out in a few weeks. So
a few days, April 1st. Yeah.
April 1st. Yeah, no, it really is. It's not a joke.
That's not a joke. That's not a joke. April 1st.
And check out Eddie's channel, because if you want to see lots of takedowns of complete idiots, you'll see that. Idiots that pretend they have got PhDs and stuff. Anyway, right. Let's go to the next question. Hi all, I've been carnivore for over a year, total cholesterol 12, HDL 2.59, triglycerides 1.33, HbA1c 33, but high sensitive CRP is 3.7. I'm assuming that's milligrams a litre, and that was in October 24, the same as last week. Is this a concern? What may be causing it? Firstly, great HDL to triglyceride ratios. High sensitive CRP, let's put that in context for you. Right, a decade of private blood testing. I can assure you, I have seen CRPs in the hundreds. I have seen people that have been coming to me with 80 and celebrating getting down to 20. So although 3.7 is, yes, a mildly, it's a slight signal of some systemic inflammation. And yes, you've had it since March. In the scheme of things, if we look at your health, how you feel, how you present, I don't think it is a big worry. Even on your labs, it will not be in the red at 3.7. It's saying that, yeah, I've seen people at 0.6. Only yesterday, somebody at 0.6 was a good score. I would not overly worry. When I do consults on bloods, I would prefer to see a lot more information on that, Alonso. But to me, yeah, there's probably some mild inflammation, systemic, but I think the more you eat this way, the more that will go down. Good thing about that, it's not increased, so it's stable. My best guess to speculate is in 6 months' time that will be lower, because it's very unusual for it to be that stable and then suddenly increase again if you're eating this way. I've never seen it, actually. Never seen it. I've only seen it get lower. Did you guys want to answer on that, or should we go on to the next?
I can say a few things about this. First of all,
great.
When it comes to CRP, I'd like to know, of course, whenever anyone has any labs or anything. And by the way, this is a complete practice round. I've never actually done this before. This is almost like a simulation of dealing with clients. So I've never done this before. So this is interesting. So if I seem like I'm inexperienced with responses, it's only because of the fact that this is my first time doing it, but it's fun. It's extemporaneous here. But I would if I were to receive, like, if I got a blood panel myself and I had CRP as one of the things listed, I'd put a little bit of bearing on it, sure. However, you'd also want to see the trend, the overall trend. What was it before? That's always very important. It's always in relative to what? What was it before you began carnivore? What was it before when you started it? So that's also something. You can also experience some inflammation if, for example, you just come down with a virus or something that you may be asymptomatic with. That can affect the values as well. So you may have elevated inflammation that you may not actually be symptomatic with, especially if it's 3.7. And Stephen, you've seen people with one that levels as 100, which is just insane. Yeah. That's very, very high. In terms of total cholesterol, HDL, triglycerides, well, I'll talk on the cholesterol for a minute. It can't be said enough that cholesterol is not the cause of heart disease, and whatever your cholesterol level is exactly what the level is supposed to be given your genes. Now, that by that logic alone, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not bad. By that logic alone, because even though it's the level that's designed to be the level in your body, given what your genes are phenotypically, expressing themselves as we just talked about earlier, it could be that whatever's causing them to express that high level is still something that you shouldn't be doing, like eating a lot of meat, for example. The problem with that is that there's set sites where heart disease actually develops, and the main associative factor is not cholesterol at all. In those, it's inflammation primarily, which is usually tied to hypertension more than anything. And so when it comes to cholesterol levels, it's not something that we should really be worried about unless it's exorbitantly high, like thousands for some reason. But if that were really a problem, that sometimes can indicate that you have a problem with sequestering. You have a gene knockout where you can't sequester excess cholesterol from the bloodstream. You would have learned about that before reaching 20, I think. You would have become symptomatic and you would have had really life-threatening problems. So that's not something that's actually a problem in that regard. And you're nowhere even near that level anyway. So these are, by the way, different units. I'm not used to looking at these units anyway. So I don't know how to convert them. But I think there's a general idea that I have, and I know that they're not up there. So anyway, there is something interesting that I want to add though. So the triglyceride to HDL ratio has been talked about a lot, and you touch on it. I haven't seen this myself, but I've heard that when you actually observe, let's say like hospitals, certain hospitals, and you just look at the demographic of people that come in with heart disease, heart attacks or something, and you look at the distribution, when you look at the association of lower triglyceride to HDL ratio, or really just the ratio itself as compared to the incidence rate, you actually get a normal distribution curve. So there's actually ambiguity as to whether that ratio may be an indicator of good levels versus bad levels. Even then, there's ambiguity there. It just typically, from what I've seen anecdotally, people that present with those lower ratios typically have the lowest risk, I guess you could say, at least assessed risk by my standards or other people's standards as well in the space. So anyway, that's another position that I want to add. Even that measurement is not a bona fide, risk assessor, I guess you could say. So anyway.
Brilliant. That's great. I'd actually just put the numbers in for you, but it doesn't matter. We got to the end of that one. We've got another super chat. I like the name. Fuck's sakes.
Love it.
Which is $5. That's thank you very much. A month carnivore, teeth and nails harder and clean, hair and skin softer. How reliable are these external signs of health in indicating overall health? I mean, this is it. I mean, this is what I do. A decade of blood testing. What the person looks like, feels like is the thing. I tell you, it is the thing. And I have had, and this is honestly true, so many bloods that are actually perfect and the person is incredibly ill. And I have some blood readings that are atrocious, in inverted commas, by the way, and they look fabulous. Right. So I think they're great indicators. And the problem with the mainstream and the legacy media is they're trying to actually stop you using common sense and going by numbers and going by, everything's a silent killer now, which is just ridiculous, But anyway, we'll go to the guys. Just before that, I want to say about the school group, we are putting our prices up in April. This isn't an April Fool either. We're doing that to sort of try and keep the numbers down and manageable. So if you want to sign up, do it now, because it will be going up, and your price now will be guaranteed for life. Absolutely guaranteed for lifetime of the membership. It won't go up at all, but from April, we are going to put the price up. So get in there quick. Anyway, guys, what do you think about this question?
Presentation always matters more than markers. I've said this 1,000 times, just like you were talking about, Stephen, for the exact same reasons that you just laid out. You can have good, quote unquote, blood tests and have a horrible presentation. You can be, immobilized, basically. You can be debilitated, and a doctor will write that off as, oh, you're still good though. And also vice versa as well. This is something that I've talked about before. At least I've thought about it more than I've talked about it. How a lot of people, they think that the more granular they get and the more scientific they get, that the smarter the conclusions, the more informative the conclusions are. When in reality, the more granular you get in an observation, the more noise is around your signal. And actually, it can make you, ironically, the more scientific you get, it can make your conclusions dumber and dumber.
Yeah.
The broader, the better, a lot of times when it comes to the inference. So a lot of people, it's reductionist thinking. There's this one marker that we want to look at. And no matter what the presentation is, which presentation representing a broad inference, no matter what that is, if this marker is higher than it should be or lower than it should be, then there's a problem. And this is a perfect example of how that's just not the case. That's not how it works. Broader the better is often a line that I throw out a lot when it comes to inferences. This is primarily something I talk about when people will reference a cellular biology paper or something that shows a certain pathway in the body, and they go, well, this pathway shows that you shouldn't be eating meat because, something will go through this pathway, and this pathway activates this, and it's like, that's how many pathways are in the body, guys? You can't guarantee that even this one molecule will necessarily go through that pathway at all times. You don't know how this pathway operates with all the other pathways and all these other compounds. It's just reductionist thinking is not superior, it's inferior. And so this is a perfect example of that. Presentation over bloods always, and even according to the Hippocratic Oath, you can make that inference. I mean, you're basically, according to the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. You're obligated to not intervene when a patient does not present with symptoms. I mean, that's what it says, and not explicitly, but implicitly. So anyway, that's what I have to say about those things there.
100%. Healthy skin begins from within. If your skin and your hair and nails are healthy, then what you're putting in is must be okay. And I think, as the guys have said, that is the biggest indicator. How do you feel? How's your hair and skin? I used to suffer with severe skin conditions all over my face, all over my back, dry skin, and all of these things have gone away. I used to suffer with severe boils all over my face and back. And since I changed I used to use medicated creams, medicated lotions and potions. And all they ever did was disguise the problems in the short term. But changing my lifestyle has changed my complexion, the way my skin looks. My dry skin has gone away. So healthy skin begins from within.
Brilliant. So Eddie, have you enjoyed it?
Yeah. Are you referring to the live stream, or are you referring to my skin clearing up? Because I've enjoyed both of those, actually. My skin has cleared up quite a bit on the carnivore diet as well. And again, you got to be careful when you say the carnivore diet, because there's multiple different variations. But on a carnivore approach, all of the variations that I've tried, I've had far better skin, actually. And it was actually within, I think, 3 months. It didn't take that long. And then, in terms of the live stream, this is good. I always like being on my toes. I never like preparing for things. In fact, I go on my way to not prepare for things in a way. Like I go, okay, don't know what to expect. Let's keep the brain sharp. So I've liked this a lot. In fact, it's convenient that you said that now, because unfortunately, I can take probably another question, but I do have to get.
Can't.
Oh, okay.
We have to go to school at 8 o'clock and do our members. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, because there's actually some tornado warnings around here, and we were going to go somewhere else afterward. I had to catch the live stream first, but
All right.
You're welcome to join us in school if you want to, Eddie, for 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay.
He's got
I mean,
he's
well,
got a tornado warning.
yeah, we do have tornado warnings, but how often do you do those actually? Do you do them
this?
sort of the
Every
Twice a week. Twice a week.
well, I could schedule another time to come on and do it there.
Perfect.
Yeah. Because
brilliant.
it would be best if I get out of here pretty quick. So I gotta pack,
Yeah,
you know.
that's
But
fair enough.
yeah,
Okay.
no, this has been good.
Right. And thank you so much. And to everybody on YouTube, we haven't forgotten you. We had our little private conversation there. Thank you for watching on YouTube. If you're a school member, obviously we'll see you over there in the next couple of minutes. If you're not a school member, don't forget to sign up because it is such a bargain. We are the least expensive group and possibly the best one in the whole community. Yeah. So, right. Come over there. Eddie, thank you so much.
Yes.
And we're going to say goodbye to everybody.
Thanks for having me
Thank
on.
you all.
Yep.
Pleasure.